What if I told you that one little countertop appliance once did the job of half a modern kitchen? No fancy gadgets. No complicated meal prep. No standing over a roaring stove while the house turned into a furnace. Just an electric skillet, a few inexpensive ingredients, and a mother who somehow knew exactly what to do with them. That skillet could turn a cheap cut of beef into a Sunday-style dinner, stretch 1 pound of meat across a hungry family, and even make a dessert when nobody wanted to heat the oven. But here's the strange part. These weren't just recipes. They were survival skills disguised as supper. Some were crispy. Some were smothered in gravy. Some came straight from a can and somehow tasted like home. And after feeding American families for decades, many of these dishes simply disappeared. So let's turn back the clock and count down 10 forgotten electric skillet dinners Americans once knew by heart. Number 10. Fried chicken. Before fried chicken became something you picked up in a bucket, it was the smell that told the whole neighborhood somebody was having a good day. Mom would season a cut-up chicken, coat every piece in flour, and carefully lower it into the electric skillet. Then came the part that made this appliance so useful. She could set the heat and trust it to stay there. The chicken slowly turned from pale and floury to deep golden brown, with a crust that crackled when you cut into it. Meanwhile, the meat stayed tender underneath. And that smell? It traveled through the house, under the screen door, and straight into the backyard. You might have had mashed potatoes, biscuits, corn, or nothing more than a few slices of bread beside it. It didn't matter. When that skillet hit the table, everybody knew dinner was something special. And for many families, fried chicken wasn't just a meal, it was the taste of Sunday. Number 9. Smothered chicken. There was a clever little trick behind this dish. Take an ordinary chicken, give it a good browning, then let gravy do the rest. The pieces were seasoned, coated lightly in flour, and cooked in the skillet until the outside developed that beautiful golden crust. But Mom wasn't finished yet. She lowered the heat, poured in her milk-based gravy, and covered the pan. For the next little while, everything happened under that lid. The chicken slowly softened while the gravy picked up the rich flavor left behind from the brown coating and drippings. When she finally lifted the lid, the chicken was tender, the gravy was thick, and the kitchen smelled like somebody had been cooking since sunrise. Then came the mashed potatoes, rice, or biscuits, whatever happened to be waiting on the table. It was a humble meal, but nobody at that table felt shortchanged. Because when that gravy was spooned over everything, even an inexpensive chicken could taste like a Sunday feast. Number 8. Swiss steak. This was the kind of dinner that made a tough piece of beef look like it belonged on a much fancier table. Mom started with round steak, the kind of cut that could be chewy if you rushed it. She worked seasoned flour into the meat, then browned it in the skillet until both sides had a rich, dark crust. Then came the transformation. Sliced onions and tomatoes went over the top. The heat was turned down, the lid went on, and the steak was left alone to slowly cook in all those savory juices. That was the secret. You didn't fight a tough cut of meat. You gave it time. Little by little, the beef softened, the onions melted down, and the tomatoes became a thick, flavorful gravy. When it was finally ready, Mom could spoon that tender beef over mashed potatoes and let the sauce run into every corner. It was inexpensive meat turned into a dinner that felt almost extravagant. And the best part? While the skillet quietly did its work, she could finally get on with everything else waiting for her. Number 7. Skillet lasagna. Lasagna usually meant an oven, a casserole dish, and enough time to make you wonder if dinner was really worth all those dirty dishes. Then someone figured out how to do it in one skillet. The beef was browned first, followed by tomato sauce and broken pieces of lasagna noodles. Instead of boiling the pasta separately, the noodles cooked right there in the sauce as everything gently simmered under the lid. Then came the cheese, soft cottage cheese tucked between the noodles, with mozzarella melting across the top. And here's what made this version so clever. The skillet turned a complicated-looking dinner into something a busy mother could actually manage on a weeknight. No giant pot of boiling water. No casserole dish. No oven heating the kitchen on a hot July evening. Just one pan quietly bubbling away on the counter. When she finally lifted the lid, the cheese was melted, the sauce was thick, and the whole kitchen smelled like an Italian restaurant. It wasn't perfect squares of lasagna. It was better. It was hot, hearty, homemade, and there was only one pan waiting in the sink. Number 6. American goulash. Some dinners were invented to impress guests. American goulash was invented to make sure nobody at home went to bed hungry. It started with ground beef sizzling in the skillet, usually joined by a chopped onion. Then came canned tomatoes, tomato sauce, and elbow macaroni. A little water, a lid, and the whole thing was left to simmer together. And that's where the magic happened. The pasta soaked up the tomato juices while the beef worked its way through every bite. What began as a handful of inexpensive ingredients became a skillet full of warm, hearty comfort. Every family seemed to have its own version. One mother added extra tomatoes. Another used more onion. Somebody's grandmother probably sprinkled cheese over the top. There was no need for a fancy recipe. You simply tasted it, adjusted it, and called everyone to the table. And if there happened to be leftovers? Well, the next day's lunch might have been even better. For families watching every grocery dollar, this was the kind of dinner that made a little food go a remarkably long way. Number 5. Cube steak with milk gravy. This was one of those dinners that could make a bargain cut of beef look like something straight out of a country diner. Cube steak went into seasoned flour, then into the hot skillet until the coating turned crisp and deeply golden. But the real prize was still waiting in the bottom of the pan. Once the steaks were set aside, Mom stirred flour into those brown drippings and slowly added milk. As she scraped the little brown bits from the skillet, they disappeared into the gravy, giving it a rich flavor that no packet could quite copy. Then the steaks went back into the pan. Soon you had tender beef sitting underneath a blanket of creamy country gravy. And this is where the mashed potatoes came in. A spoonful of potatoes, a piece of steak, and plenty of that gravy running down the side of the plate. That was a meal that didn't need anything fancy beside it. It was inexpensive, filling, and wonderfully satisfying. The kind of dinner that proved you didn't need an expensive steak to make everybody at the table feel like they were getting one. Number 4. Corn fritters. Sometimes the best family dinners started with something that barely looked like dinner at all. A can of creamed corn could become a plate of golden little fritters with just a few pantry staples. Egg, flour, baking powder, and a pinch of seasoning were mixed together until the batter was thick enough to spoon into the skillet. Then came the sizzle. Each little mound puffed as it cooked, developing a crisp, brown edge while the center stayed soft and tender with that natural sweetness from the corn. And depending on the family, they could go in completely different directions. Some liked them with a little syrup on top. Others treated them as a savory side beside whatever meat was already on the table. But there was one universal problem. Mom could never seem to make enough. The first batch would disappear while the second was still cooking. They were inexpensive, quick, and made from ingredients that were probably already sitting in the cupboard. Nothing fancy. Just the kind of clever cooking that could turn a simple can of corn into something everybody remembered. Number 3. Fried bologna. There was a time when a package of bologna could turn an ordinary evening into something the kids actually got excited about. Mom would slice it thick, then make a few small cuts around the edges. That little trick kept the slices from curling up in the skillet as they cooked. Once they hit the heat, the edges began to brown and crisp while the center puffed slightly. The smell was unmistakable, and somehow, it always seemed to bring children running into the kitchen. Then came the simplest part: soft white bread, a swipe of yellow mustard, and maybe a slice of American cheese placed underneath while everything was still hot. No complicated sauce. No special ingredients. Just a few inexpensive things put together at exactly the right moment. And because the electric skillet had a broad cooking surface, Mom could brown several slices at once, enough to build sandwiches for the whole family. It wasn't trying to be fancy. It didn't need to be. For a lot of American kids growing up back then, that first bite of hot, crispy bologna tasted like home. Number 2. Frankfurters and skillet beans. When the grocery money was getting tight, This was the kind of dinner that could make a nearly empty pantry look surprisingly generous. Mom would slice the Frankfurters into thick rounds and let them brown in the skillet until the edges picked up a little color and crispness. Then she would pour in the beans and stir in a small handful of everyday ingredients, perhaps a little brown sugar, mustard, and ketchup. Under a gentle heat, everything slowly came together. The beans became richer. The sauce thickened. And those brown pieces of Frankfurter soaked up all those sweet and savory flavors. Meanwhile, Mom could step away from the skillet and take care of whatever else needed doing. Maybe there was laundry waiting. Maybe a child needed help with homework. Maybe she simply had 5 quiet minutes to herself. Then dinner hit the table with a piece of cornbread or a few slices of bread on the side. Nothing about it looked expensive. But it was warm, filling, and enough to satisfy a hungry family. And isn't that what good home cooking was often about? Making a little stretch a lot further than anyone expected? Number 1. Porcupine meatballs. The name sounds funny, but the reason families remembered this dinner had nothing to do with the joke. Mom started with ordinary ground beef and mixed in uncooked rice, an egg, chopped onion, and seasoning. She shaped everything into small meatballs and settled them into a skillet filled with tomato sauce. Then she covered the pan and let the heat work slowly. As the rice cooked, it expanded inside the meatballs and pushed little grains through the surface. Suddenly, those plain meatballs looked like they had tiny quills, which is how they earned their unforgettable name. But the clever part was hiding underneath. The rice stretched the meat, turning a modest amount of beef into enough dinner for a whole family. The sauce kept everything moist while the meatballs slowly absorbed that rich tomato flavor. By the time Mom lifted the lid, the kitchen smelled incredible. Maybe they were served beside mashed potatoes. Maybe they went straight into bowls with extra sauce spooned over the top. Either way, children remembered them. Not because they were fancy. Because somebody had taken a few inexpensive ingredients, used a little ingenuity, and somehow made dinner feel like plenty. And that's exactly why porcupine meatballs deserve the number 1 spot. And just like that, we've reached the end of our little trip back to the old kitchen. 10 dinners, 1 skillet, and countless families who knew how to make ordinary ingredients taste like something worth remembering. Maybe you remember the smell of fried chicken drifting through the house. Maybe your mother made Swiss steak on Sunday. Or perhaps porcupine meatballs were one of those strange little dinners you haven't thought about in years. So here's the question: which one did your family actually eat? Tell us in the comments, and if there's another forgotten dinner your mother or grandmother used to make, tell us that too. Because some recipes disappear from cookbooks long before they disappear from memory. And sometimes, all it takes is one familiar dish to bring an entire kitchen back to life.